Hi, everybody. Sorry, I muted my mic there for a moment. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your time. It's great to be doing another of these. I think this is a field that's forever changing and developing. And the more often we can bring you up to date on developments in the space, the better. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Owen Sweeney. I've been working as a journalist since the mid 1990s. And for the past dozen years, I've been focusing particularly on online content and on information, on verification, authentication, disinformation, and so on. And this is a field that is constantly changing. And what we are doing is each year we try to focus on what the major developments are or what we anticipate them being based on our own experiences, based on the experiences of our network and the wider journalistic community. With that in mind, today's session is called Fundamentals of Debunking, but you will notice that it leans very heavily toward looking at sources. And there are particular reasons why I think this is going to be hugely important and growing in importance in the coming year. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of this session. I do hope to leave quite a good chunk of time for questions and answers, because I know we're dealing with people who have expertise and have experience, and we can all learn from each other here. Sometimes the question answer session can be the most enlightening part of the whole session that we have. So we'll kick this off, and if you do have questions, don't forget you can put them into Google RSVP in the Q&A box, and we will get to them. We will not be answering as we go along, because it may well be that the answer to your question will come up moments after you ask it. So we will put all the questions and answers toward the end, and then we will have time for any further questions that you may have that will have arisen during the session. So without any further delay, let's talk about debunking and about information and the sources from which we get it. So I'm going to talk firstly about reliable sources. What are they? How do we identify them? How can we be misled? What kind of sources are out there that look to us on first view to be legitimate, but may not indeed be so? And even when they are legitimate, what pitfalls we still have to be aware of and anticipate. Then we will look at content itself, which of course is what is coming from the sources and what we will all be working with in the end. And then we will move on to our question and answer session. So, something we have seen, it's coming up to a year now since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this, of course, like any major international news event, has brought new dimensions and new developments in, first of all, the spread, the dissemination, the creation of mis and disinformation, and then the tactics used against it. And any of you who have been watching this carefully will see things you did not see previously. Ways of operating by purveyors of disinformation, and ways of fighting back by fact-checking organizations, news outlets, and so on. But the basic beginning of this was in late February last year, when Russian troops moved across the border and invaded Ukraine. Many of us thought at the time this is all going to be over in a couple of days, but as we know now, Ukraine put up quite a bit of resistance, and we are now in this situation where we have an ongoing conflict. Now, with anything like this, there's a huge appetite among the general public and among the news outlets that serve them for not just information, but for content. And we've seen a lot of dramatic footage emerging, and it's not always what it seems to be. And when there is a situation like this, where there are huge pressures of time and pressures of competition and pressures of staffing and so on, you will see mistakes being made. The example I'm going to show you is a rather comical one, but it's not to say that this is done by fools. Some of the biggest news outlets in the world have made mistakes on this, again, due to those pressures that I've mentioned. So here's a video carried by Channel 13 in Israel, and it was an attempt to get an overall picture of what was going on. So they created a little bit of a montage of several videos. And watch this carefully, and you'll see the kind of thing that can happen to even big news outlets.
קילומטרים מתקרבת לקייב, ובארצות הברית מזהירים כי מדובר בנחיל מכריע שיפרוץ לבירה תוך 3 ימים. שיחות השלום החלו אתמול בבלרוס, אבל ההסכמות כלשהן עדיין נראות רחוקות. באוקראינה טוענים כי רוסיה
Now, I'm not sure how many of you, maybe it's early in the day, it is where I am at least, maybe not so in your time zone, but I'm not sure how many of you noticed something really odd in that montage. Several of them showed very standard footage of an area in conflict, but about 3/4 way in, there was this. And as the Mail, with, as usual, their headline writers are quite sharp, asking, is that Darth Invader? Because in the middle of this montage of videos purporting to be from the war in Ukraine, somebody had spliced in this piece of footage from a parody or a joke or a meme showing what appeared to be a spacecraft from Star Wars parked or crashed on the side of a highway with 2 Imperial stormtroopers waiting to be picked up. Now, it's not the kind of thing that you would want to happen to your news outlet, obviously, but it is the kind of thing that has happened repeatedly, and not just to people like Channel 13, but to some of the biggest news outlets in the world. And again, I'm emphasizing that this is not to make fun of any particular outlet, because you know well that once you start making fun of these things, you're going to end up being caught up by one of them yourself. So it's something to be very careful of, that when you're under pressure, these kind of mistakes are more likely. Now, I don't think it's very likely that any of you are going to be running Star Wars related footage and claiming that it's in Ukraine, but the potential for embarrassing and harmful mistakes is always there. And in an era where we don't have deadlines anymore, our deadlines are constantly rolling, there is competition to be first, to be fast, and to be the most dramatic. And these kind of things will lead to mistakes. Now, a trend that's become more and more prevalent and more disturbing is that it's not only the facts and the content and the information that are being undermined, it's also the people presenting those. And of course, as journalists, this is particularly relevant to you. And we will talk more in our sessions next week about protecting yourself, about this dangerous and hostile environment into which you're going as journalists, and not just physically, but in terms of your reputation. And here is an example of an attempt to undermine the credibility of a journalist and, by extension, his message. So this is Jeremy Bowen of the BBC, an extremely experienced war correspondent, has been in conflict zones all over the world, has been in serious danger several times. And he was in Ukraine early on in the conflict, reporting from the ground, trying to bring some immediacy and a sense of reality to what was actually going on. But of course, there are what you want to call them bad actors or interested actors who feel threatened by this and will try to undermine these people. I did a straw poll of a group of journalists about 6 or 7 months ago in one workshop, and I asked who has had attempts made online to undermine them or their credibility, and almost everybody answered that they had at some point. But this is Jeremy Bowen, and if you look at the post here with this, this was posted to Facebook, and it says, BBC's Jeremy Bowen pretends to be on the front line whilst a woman looks on, seemingly bemused, carrying her shopping. And if you look at this as a still image, that looks quite credible because he's lying down, taking cover, and there's this woman standing in the background just carrying a couple of bags. And there's something jarring about the combination of these images, that he doesn't appear to be acting in a way that you would expect if people are just walking around carrying their shopping. Now, this was not just put on Facebook, it was put on numerous platforms. Here's a tweet, and the wording is almost exactly the same. BBC's Jeremy Bowen pretends to be on the front line, etc. And the same picture carried there. Now, if you look at this was one tweet, and it has 73,000 likes, 2,000 quote tweets, and 16,000 retweets. This was a single tweet. There were many of these shared around. And you can imagine with the 16,000 retweets, what kind of figures did they do? So this got huge attention. And the vast majority of anything I looked at related to it was saying, oh, yes, the guy's a fraud. The BBC are lying. You can't believe them. This is nonsense. They're peddling fictions about what's actually going on in Ukraine, and so on. But when you look into this image and you find out where it comes from, it can be a bit more enlightening. So the image is a still taken from a video report that Jeremy Bowen delivered from Ukraine, and it was during the evacuation of a town that was under bombardment by Russian forces. Oops, excuse me.
Stopping was not an option. I'm okay, she said. Keep going. A disabled man couldn't make it up the steep riverbank on his own.
There's a fair amount of incoming fire coming into this now. Artillery fire. There are loads of civilians around. Families coming out. There's a lady there with her dog following on. This is the edge of the town that the Russians have got to.
So now things are a little clearer. You can see Jeremy Bowen in the middle of this situation. You can hear the bombardment going on nearby, and you can actually see in the frames before the one that has been presented as the big gotcha, you can see that the other people there are actually taking cover as well. And as there is a small break in the firing and in the explosions, that woman and others stand up and start to carefully move on. So, as you can see, this has been taken from something that is pretty much clearly legitimate, and it has been presented in a way that makes it look like something that it is not. And I think it's quite obvious that this is a deliberate effort to undermine the journalist, to undermine his reporting, and to undermine the people he works for. And this is something that many of you, particularly if you're reporting on anything controversial at all, can expect to face. So you will need to make sure that you present yourselves as well as possible as credible sources, and therefore protect both yourself and the work that you do. Now, one of the things we will touch on briefly here is that when we are dealing with mis and disinformation, there is too much out there. Nobody can handle all of it. This is something we go into again and again. How are we going to sift through it and decide what actually merits our time, attention, and effort? And this is something, again, I'll talk about this later when we get to the end of our session, that it's something that I expect to increase exponentially in the coming 12 months to 2 years. And there are specific reasons for that. But at the moment, just enough to know that we cannot handle all of this by ourselves. So how do you decide what to work on? Well, these are the three principles that I started explaining to people about 2 to 3 years ago, and that I still think hold as the most important things when you're looking at a piece of information or content and trying to decide whether or not it's worth your effort. First of all, is it actually spreading? Because if not, then do you want to be the one to spread it? Secondly, is it believable? Now, this is something of a shifting target because, as we have seen, people are inclined to believe all kinds of things that we, as hopefully discerning journalists, would not. So don't overestimate people's capacity to be fooled. And then finally, could this actually do harm? Because if it's something that is frivolous or funny, okay, it's spreading, people are believing it, but it's not doing any harm, then perhaps we can put it on the back burner and not put too much of our time and effort into it for now. These things, however, can change. This is a system I've been suggesting for a couple of years now on judging and analyzing and deciding whether something is worth working on, whether it's worth working on immediately, and so on. I refer to it as triage in comparison with the way that paramedics may have to work in a mass casualty situation and unfortunately decide who to treat now, who to put off, and who to give up on. But I look at these three things again and I say the traction, which is whether something is spreading, the degree of believability, and the potential for harm. And as you see, I think if something is getting a bit of spread and it's possibly believable, but it's potentially harmless, and you'll see up at the top there of the center section, I have watch. So keep an eye on it, just in case it does morph into something that could be harmful and then needs more of your attention. Then on the left, something has a lot of traction, it is spreading, and it's potentially harmful if people were to believe it, but it's not really believable. Prepare. So know what it is, know what the claims are being made specifically, know how you will go about tackling them, and what your sources will be. Because something can go from unbelievable to believable if a certain person seems to push it. Similarly, on the other side, if you think that something is believable and has the potential to do harm, but it's not actually going anywhere, you've just seen it in a few small spaces in the dark recesses of WhatsApp or Twitter or Telegram, well, similarly, prepare. Watch out for what the specific claims being made are, how you can tackle them, what your sources of information will be, and so on. So be ready, because something can go from potential for harm and believability, but no traction. If it's shared by a single major influencer, suddenly it can just explode and go viral. Of course, if you have something that is potentially harmful, it is likely to be believed by many people, and it is spreading, then you need to act. You need to marshal all your resources, get into action straight away, and work on this. So I hope that helps you in terms of every time you come across something like this, just seeing to what degree it meets each of these criteria. Another thing to remember is when you've decided that something might need to be checked, how checkable actually is it? Because there are things, of course, that we cannot check in a definitive way. And if anything falls on the left side here, if we have figures, we have quotes, and we know where those quotes are supposed to have come from, the sources of the information are identified because we can then query those sources. There is context, so why this information matters. There are links back to where this information or content originated from, and there are identifiable visuals, so things that you can perform visual checks on. These are all, the more of these that exist, the more fact-checking friendly something is. On the other side, however, if it's opinion, oh, that guy's a garbage footballer, or if it's speculation, there's probably going to be an election this year, the sources are not named, the information has no context with it, there are no links to where it originated or stemmed from, and the visuals and other parts of it are not clear or could be interpreted in a variety of ways. These things all make something much less fact-check friendly. Now, if you decide that something cannot be definitively fact-checked, it doesn't mean you ignore it and give up on it. But if it is getting a lot of traction, when you bring this to your audience or your public, you will have to couch it in these terms and say, here is why we say this cannot be proven fully either true or false, because it is made up of, for example, speculation. There are no sources. It's unclear what's meant here. So it doesn't mean that you have to know everything, but it doesn't mean that if you don't know it, you ignore it. You don't need to know everything, but you need your audience to know whatever you know and how you know that. So don't just leave things if they're not going to be obviously verifiable or not, or non-verifiable. Just make sure that you're telling your audience why you're doing this. So we're going to take a look at sources and content. And obviously these two things are always linked because any piece of content should have a source. But we will start by looking at what sources are, and specifically what credible or reliable sources are. And again, this is something that's becoming more and more important because there are more sources of information out there, and all sources are not equal. So what constitutes a good and reliable source? These are probably the four most important points. Of course, you're all experienced people. If anybody wants to put anything else in here, please, by all means, do so. But at least something should have these four or as many of these for as possible, to be considered a credible source. First of all, that it's identifiable, that it actually has first-hand knowledge of the thing that it's commenting about, that there is relevant expertise involved, because we all know people with big followings online who are making huge reputations and money for themselves by commenting on things that they have no obvious relevant expertise about. And finally, that they're not overcommitted to an agenda. When I originally wrote this up, I said is not committed to an agenda. But we all have some kind of agenda. And some of those agendas may well be good ones, and others may not. But it is important that the person is not overly committed, that they're not obsessive about an agenda, because that is something that can very easily warp your way of working, warp your credibility, or how you approach facts and content and so on. So watch out for an overcommitment to a particular agenda. So first of all, here's an example of a good source being identifiable. This is my old colleague and friend, Malachi Brown, who's now with the New York Times. But as you can see on his Twitter account, he has his real name. He has a photograph. He has a verification tick, which, okay, we'll go into that a little bit more next week when we talk about sources, because this is something that has shifted dramatically in the past few months. He does mention the section where he works in the New York Times, and he gives his phone number for contacting him through Signal. So all of these are things that should engender a certain amount of trust and credibility. On the right is an anonymous person with a bunch of numbers after their name, may or may not be their real name, a very generic and weird-looking profile picture, and no other information as to who they are, what they do, or how you might get in touch with them. You can see with Malachi as well there on the left that he also has open direct messaging on Twitter. So again, you can contact him directly. So these are obviously diametrically opposing examples. They're opposite ends of the spectrum, but most of the time you'll be able to look at them and judge them to be on one or other end of this spectrum. Good sources should also have first-hand knowledge of any information that you are getting from them. And this is recently from the flooding in Australia. And I saw a lot of content coming out of the flooding in Australia, which was videos of tsunamis in Japan or flooding in Jakarta or other places like this. There was a lot of false information and fake content coming out of it. Now, this one is from the Facebook account of a member of parliament for the local area that he's talking about here. He refers to flying into the area for a flood inspection together with the acting prime minister. If you went to the acting prime minister's Facebook page, you could see that he was there on that day as well. There were news reports reporting that these guys were there conducting on-the-ground inspections and so on. So it's clear that this was something that came from first-hand information. Now you look on the other side, and it's somebody again with a manga character, it appears to be, as their profile, with a fake name. And they're saying, I have been told from a reliable eyewitness, who is also unnamed, that people are being dragged out and forced to take COVID tests. Clearly, this person is not speaking from first-hand knowledge. They're saying they've heard something. They're not telling us who told them that. And also they're failing the tests from the previous, the identifiability test. So this is not somebody that you want to be taking their information too seriously. Then we talk about relevant expertise. And this is a guy, Dr. Shiva Ayaturai. Forgive me if I haven't pronounced that perfectly. But he is a major player in the anti-vaccine information space, gets a lot of appearances on some of these news networks. I use the term news rather flexibly there. But you'll see here it says, exclusive top doctor exposes everything the deep state is trying to hide about coronavirus. And where does this top doctor designation come from? And if you go to this guy's Wikipedia page, you will see that he has several degrees from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And at first blush, you may think, well, this makes him seem like an expert of some kind. Now, he is commenting, as you see, on coronavirus. And you will see that he holds 4 degrees from MIT. Now, the degrees are in electrical engineering and computer science, visual studies, mechanical engineering, and systems biology. Crucially, none of these are anything to do with medicine. Systems biology at first sight looks like it might be, but when you look into what it actually is, none of these are a medical qualification of any sort. So I'm not saying that Dr. Ayadura is wrong, but I'm saying that as a source, you have to take into account that he does not have clear qualifications in the relevant subjects that he's speaking so loudly on. The next thing then I mentioned was not being overcommitted to an agenda. And you look at this, and it's a tweet, and it's saying, France feels the bite of sanctions on Russia. Now the French wait in massive lines at petrol stations in Paris. Take a look at a real consequence of sanctions on Russia. And you look at the source here, and you'll notice a few things about it. It does have a profile picture. It's verified. The guy names himself, at least, as an economist at Johns Hopkins, and you can check that and find that it is actually genuine. You can also see that he's got over 500,000 followers, and this starts to look like a very credible source here. So do you take that tweet and say, well, it's coming from this guy, therefore it's obviously real? But then when you actually go and check that what's going on in France at that time, you'll see that there was major industrial action going on. Total Energies, one of the major bodies dealing with energy and power supply in France, is in dispute with energy and power-related trade unions. And as a result, there were massive backups at petrol stations and so on. And this is what was causing the situation that is misrepresented by this guy in this tweet. And my interest was piqued by this, and I started to look at the guy's record and found several times he had shared videos that were from older incidents and claiming that they were current, and other pieces of misinformation like this. And you start looking at the things he's tweeting about: no border security, no rule of law, lots of illegals, lots of problems. According to blah, 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 the warmongering politicians in the US and the EU are using Ukraine as a dangerous proxy war against Russia. All these uppercase tweets as well don't fill you with confidence. Then it's talking about Germany's open arms immigration policies equals lots of problems. Attacking on the Democrats in the United States. So you can see that the guy has a particularly right-of-center bent. There are issues such as immigration, such as US policy toward Russia, and so on, that he is very passionate about. And again, it's not relevant whether I agree with his views on these or not, but it's the kind of account that you have to be very careful about, because you can see that is very committed toward pushing particular political and social agendas. So again, you know, the evidence is there. He has put out pieces of information that are clearly wrong and misleading, and it's not a stretch of the imagination to link his commitment to an agenda to his overzealous behavior. I'm not even saying he's making these mistakes deliberately, but I'm saying that it can cloud your judgment and warp your behavior in terms of being careful about what you put out there. So to recap on that, is it a real person? Can you identify them as such? Are they anywhere near what they're claiming to be commenting on? Do they actually know anything about it? And do they have a clear agenda or motivation that may be coloring their actions? So techniques that we will use on this, and we're going to go into these next week: source analysis and social auditing, looking at people's digital footprint, being able to figure out more about them, and then corroboration and comparison, which really will fall under what we're doing next. What we're talking about next is that looking at content and trying to figure out whether it is actually what it purports to be. So the first thing we will always use when we're looking for information is, of course, search engines. And the great thing about this is that you all use them all the time, every day. Maybe not for this kind of work, but There's something that everybody has at least some expertise in doing. So there's nothing completely new about using search engines. When you're searching for corroborating information, and I'll talk a little bit later about why corroboration is going to be so important and context, it's important to be able to search well. So when you're putting in your search terms, try to put yourself in the head of the kind of person who's posting information or content and think, what would I say about this? So, for example, be specific on the kind of things that you're looking for. It's amazing how often people aren't specific and try to go a little bit lateral before they go straight down the middle and search for the particular things. Do look at varying the terminology you use. And these examples are almost all English, but they will work in pretty much whatever language you tend to be looking at. There will be 2 different words for similar things. There will be a variety of ways of describing the same things. Then look at locations. This can be huge in terms of major weather events, because people will say, look what's happening in blah, blah village, in this street, in this square, and so on. Abbreviations and acronyms can be very helpful, particularly if they're slightly unusual. If you're looking at some organization and their abbreviation or acronym is something like BBC or CNN, okay, that's not going to be so helpful, so don't bother using it. But watch out for misspellings. And this is something, again, that I stress it in English here, but I have seen it happen across numerous languages, not just in terms of misspellings, but in terms of varieties in the way, for example, something with its own script, how that is then rendered in a Western script, for example, or if how an English word may be rendered in a phonetic script such as Hangul in Korea. So there may be varieties in the way these things are referred to. Then things like hashtags, and this is still something that holds true, that when you are searching for something that's a hashtag, remove the actual hash symbol when you're searching for it, because if you include it in there, you're only getting results where it has that hash. Whereas if you remove the hash and still do the search for Me Too or whatever, you will get results that have been posted both with and without the hash. Then don't go too broad. If you're looking for an incident that took place in Tokyo, there's really not much point in putting in Tokyo, because you're going to be flooded with results, the vast majority of them irrelevant. But if you can narrow down where something happened, for example, Shibuya, that will be helpful for you. People's names, of course, will always be relevant. But, if I'm Irish, if you say Mr. Kelly, it's probably not going to be very helpful. If you're in Korea and you say Mr. Kim, it's also probably not going to be particularly helpful. So unusual names will help you more. And this is why you need to go through these and decide which of these things will be helpful. Will names be useful? Maybe, maybe not. Will hashtags be useful? Possibly. Then look at local slang or jargon, how people refer to things. An example that always comes up with me is that when there are demonstrations in Chile, the water cannon trucks that the police use are referred to as guanaco. Now, guanaco is an animal a little bit like a llama or a vicuna. It spits. And this is why they refer to these water cannon trucks as guanaco. But if you see demonstrations in Santiago in Chile, you should always search for guanaco and you will get video or pictures of the water cannon trucks. Don't forget to use operators. I'm sure many of you are already using these, but they will be helpful in terms of looking for exact phrases, searching particular sources. What has this news outlet or this website said about this thing? So you can narrow it down by using the cite operator. You can look into file types. You will see that a lot of companies and organizations will put all their important information out there, for example, in PDFs. You can search for these file types, again, by using a file type operator. And then things like caches. If you are worried that the information you're looking for may have been changed, you can look for the cached, a previous version of a page or site. We can also talk next week as well about archiving, because this extends the whole ability to look back at things a lot more. And then, go to the Google Advanced Search page. In this case, we've got the Advanced Video Search page. This will prompt you and give you many more ideas about ways to narrow down your searches. You can also, as you use these and you see the kind of searches each one generates, you'll be able to remember them. You won't need to keep going back to this page. You'll be able to just type them in yourself. But remember, the content you find may only be as good as the searches that you make for it. If you don't find something online, that does not mean that it doesn't exist. It just can mean that you weren't able to find it. Maybe you need to improve your searches, or in certain cases, platforms may have prevented you from finding the information you want. I know that any of you who are trying to find information and content on Facebook can testify to how difficult it can be from time to time, not because of anything you're doing, but because Facebook's internal search is pretty poor. And Chingy will be talking to you in the coming days about how better to work on searches on Facebook and other platforms. Now, we're just going to talk briefly about debunking visuals because I think most of you will already be doing quite a bit of this. I'm talking about things like trying to find out whether images are what they purport to be, whether they've been manipulated, whether they're reposted out of context. Then moving on to things like when you see a photo or a video, can you geolocate it? Can you prove that it was taken somewhere other than where it claims to be? Or can you prove that it was taken where it's said to be? Now, this is something that we've gone over and over for years now, and it's become part of the accepted practice in this whole space. So I just want to talk about updates and major developments in the space. Reverse image search is still possibly the most important single thing anyone can do when they're trying to debunk something. I often say that if I was forced to teach only one thing and abandon everything else, but I could be guaranteed that every single person would do this every single time, it would be reverse image search. I think it would kill off a vast proportion of the disinformation and misinformation that makes its way around. The major development in this space recently, and I'm not just saying this because we're in a Google News Initiative workshop, Google Lens has come on extremely strongly in this space. It's doing things that it was not capable of even 6, 12, 18 months ago. Here, just the one example I've given straight away is that about a year ago, I was telling people, don't bother with Google reverse image search if you're trying to identify buildings or streetscapes. That is now not the case. And quite often I'm finding it's the strongest out there. It does, as you can see here, I've used the crop function where you can crop in tighter on a specific building in a picture. And there's a very good chance that it will identify what it is. And it can, I have to say, it can be frustrating for me because I don't like to narrow people down too much to one platform, regardless of whether it's Google or Microsoft or anything else. I like people to have lots of alternatives and to get used to using those alternatives. But Google Lens has become very powerful, and I find myself using it again and again, even sometimes just pointing it on my phone at my computer screen and using it in that way. So it would be wrong of me to ignore what's become a very powerful tool. Now, what happens now in your browser is that when you right-click on an image and you go to search image with Google, it now, rather than directing you to the plain Google image search, it will direct you to Google Lens search. And here you can see straight away it's doing a Google Lens type search. And if you are not fully happy with what you're getting from that, there is still the option to go to plain Google image search. You'll see there up on the right, it says find image source. And this is available both in your desktop version and in your handheld version. In this case, as you can see, it goes to Google image search. It didn't really help in this case, and I went back and I tried numerous crops on that image and so on, and got better results from Lens. Now, the easiest and most efficient way, I do talk about diversifying and looking at different ones. So, for example, if you're looking at something that may have come from mainland China, you're probably better off looking at something like Baidu, because obviously they tried to block off some of the major players like Google and so on and Bing. So it is still good to have these alternatives. We very often will tell people just install the InVid browser plugin in your Chrome browser and use that, because it does allow you to search a lot of different search engines, and you can choose it simply just by right-clicking on your picture. And one thing that's interesting here, I'm constantly badgering the people at InVid and telling them, oh, why can't we do this? Can we change that? And a couple of months ago, I said, Google is now emphasizing Google Lens more. Can you reflect that in InVid? And they said, well, since it's going straight to that, we're just going to leave it the way it is. But I noticed a couple of days ago that they have now put in the ability to choose either Google regular image search or Google Lens when you right click on the picture. I'm not sure when they did that, but it's reasonably recent. The funny thing I did notice that when you do this through InVid rather than directly in the Google image search built into the Chrome browser, it seems to default to Google Lens trying to know what you are looking for. So in this case, when I went through InVid to search that picture, it defaulted to a crop down to the police car, which is, of course, the sort of outstanding visual element in this picture. It also, I'm not sure whether you can notice this from where you are, you can see that it has selected the text on the police car. So it's offering again to pull out that text for you, to possibly put that in as a text search or to translate it. And these are all things that can be helpful. Of course, you don't have to go with what Google Lens is suggesting to you. This is all rather dynamic here. And when you see that crop coming up like that, you can just grab the crop handles and pull them out to search for the full image. And you will see here then that your results change dramatically because it's now looking for all the elements or looking for things that resemble this. And finally, before we go to questions and answers, the thing that comes up again and again is the issue of deepfakes and how worried we should be about them. Should we be worried? The answer is yes and no. And I'm not going to leave that hanging. I'll explain to you what I mean. Now, deepfakes are increasingly turning up. When we saw them coming out at first, it was like things like making Will Smith look like Keira Knightley and so on. And it was mostly just done for the sake of comedy. But obviously, any new ability, any new technology like this will immediately become the object of interest of people pushing a specific agenda. And here was a particularly nasty example of it recently, where a deep fake video was released purporting to be of the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky telling the country that Ukraine was surrendering and saying, you know, you can see the quote here, "I decide to say goodbye to you. I advise you to lay down your arms and return to your families." And this obviously would be a huge thing and could have a very bad effect on the morale of troops, of the public, and possibly even persuade some people to give up closer to the front line if they saw this. This video came out on a credible Ukrainian news source. So here we are back to talking about credible sources again. However, when you look at the video, and it's been debunked, you can look this up, you can search for it online, you'll find some good examples of how it was debunked. It wasn't particularly great. Even just looking at the still there, you can see that Zelensky's head looks rather odd compared to his body. The lighting seems different. There's a bit of a sharp halo around, so you can see that the head has been superimposed on the body. And it's rather oversized as well when you look at real pictures of the man. But it's not always going to be like this, because like any AI technology, it's learning very, very fast. It will improve hugely. And visual means alone will not be enough to help you to debunk these things. So I have been speaking about finding corroboration and finding context. And when you looked at this, you could not see any other credible news outlet referring to Zelensky having released this. And after a little time, a tweet came up from the channel where it had been released, saying, where it says that this is a translation, the running line. They mean the live stream of Ukraine 24 TV and the Today website were hacked by enemy hackers and broadcast Zelensky's message about alleged capitulation. This is fake. No one is going to give up, and so on. So this is the news outlet where it was released. And you can see them saying straight up, we were hacked. This is not real. And you're now getting context and the opposite of corroboration. You're getting them saying this did not happen. This is not from us. So the two things that I'm quite certain about deepfakes and other kinds of artificial intelligence technology is that they will soon be close to perfect. When I say perfect, I mean they will be so convincing that we as ordinary people will not be able to tell the difference by purely visual investigation, and we will not have the technology available to us. However, this means that your long-standing journalistic abilities of looking for context and corroboration, remember, we don't accept anything as reliable from a single source, these will stand to you and remain very powerful tools. So always go beyond the search engines and the tools. And the people I'm talking to today, I'm sure most of you have solid journalistic fundamentals. Look for people in the area where something is going to happen. Look to corroborating information. Don't forget journalism. Just because we have new tools doesn't mean we dump and throw away the old ones. And on that point, all I want to do is say thank you, and we will go to questions and answers. Before that, please take a look at the bottom of this slide. I know our time today is short. There will be many things that you'll have questions about that you may not even think of right now. You may think of them tonight or tomorrow. Please always reach out to me if you have questions. And don't feel like there is no way of asking things that occur to you later. Always feel free to get in touch with me. That's my email there. You can also find OSINT Essentials on Twitter. There is a direct messaging capability. So please don't ever hesitate to use that also. Now, I see we have a question here. It says, however, we use Google Lens and reverse image searches for videos and images checking. In a country like India, it's mostly images, videos taken locally and shared via WhatsApp. Often it becomes difficult to get results for such images and videos in the searches as they are not there in the internet. So in this case, how do we debunk the videos or images? And that's a very good question. It's a very relevant question. And it's one for which I have no easy answers, perhaps no fully satisfactory answers, because the one thing we have to accept is that private messaging apps have moved the goalposts and changed the game. And they have made it much more difficult, because whereas it used to be a thing of finding where did this originate online, you could go into YouTube or Facebook or wherever and find the earliest version of something. Whereas nowadays, long before it ever makes it to the open web, something may have bounced around the WhatsApp sphere or Signal or Telegram or Kakao or whatever, long before it actually ever made it to somewhere we can see it. So this does make things more difficult. However, this is the case in which, and I know this is an imperfect solution, but this is the case in which we have to go digging and looking for context and corroboration. It's something that's going to be frustrating. It's something that's going to be much more difficult than simply being able to reverse image search and find something older. But we are going to have to go into down and dirty old-fashioned journalism and trying to find, if there's videos saying this happened, where is it said it happened? Is there anybody local or anybody with local knowledge who can say to us, yes, I was there? Again, reliable sources, but who can say, yes, I was there and I saw this happen, or yes, I was there and this is not the way it went down. It was something different. That's misleading. The context is wrong, and so on. So we're having to go to a lot more flexible, excuse me, I'm slightly losing my voice, a lot more flexible and a lot more imaginative ways of working. It's very, very often not going to be easy. I'm sorry I can't give you something more slam dunk on that, but that's the way we're increasingly having to work. Another thing, and I did say earlier, I would mention this, another thing with the whole artificial intelligence, some of you may be familiar with ChatGPT. It's a newish, came out publicly in November, artificial intelligence related tool that is capable of generating very, very convincing text. At the moment in English, increasingly it will happen in pretty much any language. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have many more sources of information. This is why you're going to have to get as good as possible at analyzing and evaluating sources, because I can see something coming where there will be an explosion in blogs and apparent news websites and so on. There are already many of them out there trying to look credible, trying to look like real news. But with things like ChatGPT, this is going to make creation more scalable, faster, make the volume much easier to create. And we are going to be flooded with this kind of information. So we need to get better at digging deep and identifying and evaluating these sources. I have another question here, Sanjana. Hi, Owen. What to do when Google search operators do not work as they're intended to? For instance, a search query loaded with keywords related to the content available on a certain news website, when coupled with a site operator and the name of that website, does not really remove its content from the results. Or with a minus site operator, sorry. It should work is the first thing I will say. I would probably need to see an example. I would say, Sanjana, could you follow up with me on this and message me and perhaps give me an example? And if it's some tiny glitch that I can answer to you directly, I'll just do that. But if it is something that appears to be a major issue, we will revert to the whole group, because this is one of the reasons I find these kind of questions very important, because sometimes they will bring up something that is relevant and helpful to everybody. So please do get in touch with me, and let's dig into this a little bit more and see if we can come up with a satisfactory answer. We still have about 10 minutes, so please don't be shy. Mike tells me 9 minutes. Okay. Fact check. So please, if you do have questions, feel free to ask them now. Also, as I say, don't feel like the moment has passed. If we finish up and you think, oh, thank you, Sanjana said, Sanjana, okay, we'll be in touch. Yeah, we will get back to that. So, as I say, if you think of something tonight, next week, or next month, I'm always available to chat about this. Anyone who knows me knows that I will talk about this stuff nonstop. So we'll give it a moment, let people breathe and think. And if we don't have any further questions, we will let you busy people get back to whatever it is you need to be doing. And like I said, let's not regard that then as the end of this. Let's regard this as the beginning of the next stage in these partnerships that have been working so well for us over the past few years. Sophia, hi. ChatGPT also works quite well in Chinese. Okay. Can you also share some communities platforms we can keep an eye on for any deepfake creations? I will look into that, Sophia, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'll try to build a decent database of information sources so that we can see, because, like you say, any new creations and so on, this field will explode. It's going to go exponential, and it's going to be hard to keep up with. So we will try to create the best possible way of keeping an eye on that. Now, we do have other sessions coming up. Let me just check exactly what they are. Yes, we have tomorrow, Chingy is going to take you through navigating social media platforms. And so talking about the major platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, possibly others. The following day, you will be back with Chingy again, and she will talk to you about a very important and very interesting thing, which is searching messaging apps. How to look into things such as Telegram, WhatsApp, Discord, and so on. What you can do, and crucially what you can't do, because we do very often hope that we can do all these amazing things, but sometimes it's simply not possible with what we have available to us. But it's important to know what can and can't be done. Then next week, I'll be back with you talking about analyzing and investigating sources. I hope today's session has given you an appreciation of how important this will be. And we're going to then wrap up the day after, so on January 18th, talking about ethics and security, because as I did refer to earlier, you're all in the crosshairs, unfortunately. As journalists, you're all somebody's enemy. And we will need to look into how we can make ourselves as well defended against attack as possible. One of those is working in secure ways, but another one, of course, is ensuring that our own ethics and our own best practices are as good as possible. So we will talk about both of those when we wrap up. And again, with each of these sessions, we will always try to leave plenty of time for questions, answers, comments, suggestions. And of course, you can contact us directly if you do have suggestions or comments. So I think, or the other thing, which Chingy has reminded me of, that these sessions will be recorded and will remain online. So please feel free to revisit. And if you watch this back and say, oh, why didn't I notice he said that? I should have asked about that. Again, feel free to contact us. So they will remain online up until the end of March. So please feel free to revisit them at any time and familiarize yourself with what we've been talking about. So that's about it. All that's left is for me to say thank you very much for your time. I always appreciate people trying to move on in this field. And I look forward to hopefully meeting up with some of you either online or even better in person at some point in the near future. Thank you very much and have a great day.